first of all, I just have to say congratulations on Duster. I feel like this is a show where I have not had as much fun watching anything as I've had watching this show over the last
Oh,
few.
good. Oh, that makes my day.
But I would love to hear about the genesis, the sort of seed that was planted, the idea for this story. How did the idea for Duster kind of emerge in those early plotting stages between you and J.J. Abrams?
Yeah, it all emerged because JJ had read a couple of scripts that I had written and he really loved them. And so he wanted to meet. And the kernel of one of the stories that he loved, it was sort of it's a crime thriller, but it has a little bit of a like a Western twist. And so it made him think of this image that he'd had in his head for about 20 years of a phone booth in the middle of the desert and a muscle car racing up to it. And he said, I think Josh Holloway gets out and answers the phone, but I don't know anything else. And so it was really just like the image and us talking. And I started to pitch ideas about, who was his character and why was he in the middle of the desert and who was with him and what, bad stuff were they getting up to. And so that really began the process. And we started building the story together and we wanted his character to collide with this really unstoppable force that is Nina Hayes. And so that was really the genesis of the idea.
It's funny to hear you say Josh was always the person that JJ envisioned getting out of the car and picking up the phone, because as I was watching this show, I thought to myself, sometimes it just feels like you get a show where this is the perfect marriage of character and actor. Like, it does not feel like there's anybody else who could have played Jim Ellis other than Josh Holloway. When you had a sense of the story and kind of the pieces were starting to come together, was it always really Josh that you were envisioning? Like, how early did those conversations start about kind of bringing him in and, with the process?
Literally from the first moment we spoke, like from the first, like within the first 30 minutes, we were like, Josh Holloway, it has to be him. JJ has always felt like, and I agree that Josh just feels like he's from the 70s. He could be in the 70s. And so it was the idea of making him a getaway driver that was really fun, like something where he could be part of a crime family and an integral piece. And we get to see the inner workings of how that crime family is put together. So that was always from the beginning. And of course, Josh and JJ have worked together, a bunch. So it was just a great time to give him an actual vehicle, literally and figuratively, for him to star in.
You already mentioned Nina. So I was very curious about sort of the research that went into looking into what the experience would have been like for Black agents, specifically Black female agents at the FBI during that time. Did you do a bit of a deep dive into really helping to flesh out Nina's story in that way?
Absolutely. We did a ton of research. We had a wonderful FBI consultant named Jerry Williams, who was brilliant, and she was in the bureau in the late 70s and early 80s, and she was really able to unpack like what her experience was, what was the experience of agents that also looked like her and that were part of her class. And so we really did a ton of research and talked to folks. And then of course we used Sylvia Mathis as a touchstone, the real life first FBI agent who came in years later, and we sort of stirred them all in the pot and sort of mixed them up with characters that we know, and that's how we created Nina.
One thing that really stuck out to me while watching the show, the soundtrack is incredible. I mean, the number of 70s hits, straight up bangers across the board that you guys are able to incorporate as part of the show. Were there any songs that you tried to get and couldn't? Were all
my God,
those,
yes.
On the wish list able to end up there? What was the process behind kind of finding the sound of Duster?
I love this question because I love the music of the show. That was probably one of the biggest things that we wanted in the show was we had to have great compositions, but we also had to have awesome needle drops. So we had a great music supervisor who came in and was always making wonderful suggestions to us. There were a couple of Elvis songs we couldn't get. It was insanely expensive to get Elvis. We tried to get a Johnny Cash song. We couldn't get that one. And even we ended up getting one of the Beatles songs, I think. Hopefully that stayed in there. No, George Harrison. We got the George Harrison song. And oh my God, that was a dream because that really sets the tone for the first episode. So and we have one also in the finale. So it's great bookends.
One, I feel like you can't talk about Duster also without talking about Keith David, who gives such a tremendous performance in the show as Ezra Saxton. And I feel like Sax isn't just this sort of stereotypical villainous mob boss, this mustache twirling, antagonist that we can sometimes get in media. How did you really want to build his complexity and his complicated morality in to really sort of sow the seed of doubt in the viewer? Because it really feels like you kind of go on the journey with Jim where you're questioning, like, did he do these things that he's being suspected of?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, Keith David is the man, the myth, the legend. He is absolutely brilliant. I was so excited when he decided to join the show. I was like, he read the script, he likes it, because I was envisioning someone like him. He's the only one that could bring that gravitas and also make you want to have a drink with him. He is someone that I built. I built out a really detailed character arc for him, and really dug into his backstory. Made him, obviously a veteran. And of course, he has his own criminal ways. He had his whole life and, on the East Coast before he came to Arizona. And we really drilled down into that friendship that he built with Wade. And so they have backstory. And so that also filters down to Jim's relationship with Saxton. So we really wanted it to feel like family. And what would you do if you suspected someone in your family, your father figure, had done something so heinous? So you really get to see the conflict within Jim. He doesn't want to believe this, but there's so much evidence that's building up that Nina keeps bringing to his attention. So it was really key that she had something solid in order for Josh to want to turn, because he's such a loyal guy. There's no other way that he would.
There's something else that I think is really fun about this show, which is the historical figures that kind of get dropped throughout the narrative.
Yeah.
Colonel Tom Parker, Howard Hughes. How much, though, did you really want to kind of sprinkle in these famous faces without making it too much of a motif or like too distracting to the overall story?
Yeah, the goal was to kind of sprinkle them in, like you said, feather them in. Even in the second episode when he goes to that pool party, there was supposed to be even more like little celebrities that you kind of see in the background. But we never wanted it to be intrusive. But we also, there's so many, like we read so many accounts and just stories of parties and places where there were just famous people everywhere. And so we just wanted it to kind of feel a little bit like it's happening in the background. It doesn't distract you from the mission, but it's there.
Without going into spoilers, I think where the show ends up definitely is setting up a really interesting season 2.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that do you have sort of hashed out in terms of ideas if the show continues?
So much. We have so much hashed out. JJ and I, when we first sat down, we kind of thought about what would if we had 5 seasons. So we kind of built out tent poles for what that would be. And then for season 2, since we finished and drilled down on what season 1 would be, I've already like dug into what season 2 could be and pitched it to the network and, talked to them about it, and they were excited. So hopefully if, people tune in and, we get eyes and people watch, maybe we'll get the chance to have another season.
I am all out of time. Thank you so much for sitting and chatting with me. Like I said at the top, it's such a fun viewing experience, this show. I mean, it's literally like I was saying, just let it take you for a ride, because it's a wild one. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
This was great. Good to see you, Carly. Bye.
You take care.